We're going to go through the top 6 tiers. It's actually going to get us to the top 51 running backs to get through those 6 tiers. And we're just going to kind of react to it, see who we think's missing from these tiers, if the order's right, who's maybe too high, too low, and see as we stand here at the end of May what we think about the running back rankings. Fitz, does that sound good?
That sounds great. And,
right.
It's great to converse with Mr. Daigle again. We haven't seen each other since last, I think, September in our Chicago Media League draft.
Mm-hmm.
So, always good to catch up with John.
We're going to have some fun here today. Let's dive right in because we do have 51 names to get through. Tier 1, just 3 names deep, though. It's Christian McCaffery. He's going to be the number 1 overall pick in most leagues that you're in, probably. Then it's Breece Hall at RB2 and Bijan Robinson at RB3. So, John, what was your first reaction when seeing just those 3 names as their own tier right at the top?
Makes a bunch of sense. Tiers are always differentiated based on how people are parsing them. When I go like in draft tiers, I like to be a little bit heavier. So I think our tiers are going to be the same, but I personally may have them dissected in that I only want Christian McCaffrey in a tier of himself, right? Like I only want him with CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase as the players who you could take 101 overall. But honestly, with the other 2 guys, that would be the next tier for me. So all I'm doing is literally separating our tiers here. But Bijan, Breece Hall, however anyone wants to scramble them, of course, it's totally fine. For Bijan, we have Arthur Smith out of the way. For Breece Hall, we have Dalvin Cook out of the way. And just another full offseason removed from the last injury that hampered him out the gates last year. So, yeah, those are the big 3. I don't think anyone could argue with that.
Fitz, what do you think about John's point about CMC maybe deserving his own tier? Because I think, we've done a couple of these tiers based on position episodes already together, Fitz. I think running back is the only position that you would be maybe willing to make that case for, that there is a tier of 1 at the top for this season. Would you say that about CMC, or do you think it is a tier of 3?
No, I agree with John. I mean, I think CMC is probably a tier unto himself at running back. And then, maybe a second, sort of a later first round tier with Bijan and Breece Hall. And maybe for some people, Jonathan Taylor or Jahmyr Gibbs could possibly sneak into that late first round tier. But so I do agree with that. And to me, it's kind of the interesting, I think people are sort of divided on Breece Hall versus Bijan. If you're thinking first round running back, I have Bijan higher. I think the consensus says Breece, but I mean, the Falcons have the easiest schedule in the league coming up this year, according to Warren Sharp. They were graded 7th in run blocking by PFF last year, where the Jets were 27th. And Bijan hasn't torn his ACL before. So I like him a little more than Breece, but I do think they're both worthy first round picks, especially when we're so short on workhorse running backs, and both of these guys are probably going to be true workhorses.
So, John, if we assume CMC goes 1, again, I think that'll be the case in most drafts, how many wide receivers need to come off the board before you're then turning to your choice of Breece or Bijan?
I think it's 3 for me, 4 if you're in PPR leagues. I'm going to throw Amon-Ra St. Brown in there in PPR leagues. The Lions also have, and we'll probably talk about this with a lot of Lions players, the Lions have a really good run out in that they only play 3 games outdoors all year. Unfortunately, 2 of them are in your fantasy playoffs in week 16 and 17. But beyond that, for the regular season, Jared Goff and the Lions can certainly get you there. So for PPR, AAR speed for me. Outside of that, if you're in half PPR standard, I'm going to take AAR speed and his high catch floor out of there and only mention the 3 guys I talked about earlier, Tyreek, CeeDee Lamb, and Jamar Chase.
Fitz, what do you think? Same question. At what point, assuming CMC and then X number of receivers, are you turning to Bijan?
I think it is, for me, Tyreek, Lamb, Chase. Then I debate with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Justin Jefferson whether I might actually take Bijan over either of those guys, just because it's hard to get a foothold at running back if you miss the first 4 or 5 guys. Then it's like there are just so few bankable things at running back beyond the top 5 that even though maybe it might not feel like the right thing to do, especially in a PPR format, I might be willing to push it a little bit and then just kind of ignore running back for the next 6-7 rounds.
The only thing I'll say about Justin Jefferson, because right now that's also the most popular screenshot on social media, is everyone gets Justin Jefferson around 106, 109 in best ball, and then they show everyone because it looks sexy on paper. I get it. But remember last year, we basically have 4 games with him at full strength with Kirk Cousins, and then 4 games at the end of the year, not only without Kirk Cousins, but also no T.J. Hawkinson. And although everyone likes to cite the production that Nick Mullins, Jaron Hall had through the air, Nick Mullins, multiple 400-yard passing games, Justin Jefferson quietly averaged 6 fewer half PPR points per game in that 4-game stretch at the end of the year because the accuracy of those targets are not similar to Kirk Cousins' targets at all. And so I am somewhat concerned, and Justin Jefferson's still my wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6, so it's not even like a heavy argument. I get it, but I am concerned the target tree is much more ambiguous than we think from Sam Darnold. Like there's a bottom there that probably Justin Jefferson has never experienced in his career, or maybe he doesn't deserve to be in that top tier. So I personally am just a little bit wary of the situation.
I'm going to be winding up with a lot of Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson on my rosters for that type of reason, where you can poke just enough holes in some of the wide receivers where I'm still comfortable getting another guy in round 2 or 3 or whatever. At running back, I do feel like once you get past the top, I don't know, 9 or 10, like there's definitely like running backs I'll be fine having on my roster and you can build the upside case for, but there's really not that many that I'm feeling real strong about. I'm very happy to have this guy as my hero RB or whatever strategy I'm using. Fitz, what do you think about that as kind of like the overall, just the state of the position? Is this a deep position this year, or is this a position where you really want to come out of the first 1 or 2 rounds with a guy?
I mean, I don't know if it's not 1 or 2 rounds. It's that top 5. Like if I don't get one of the top 5, I'm not forcing the issue. Like tier 3, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but tier 3 scares the daylights out of me. And I really don't want anyone from that tier, quite honestly.
What do you think about that, John? Just kind of the overall state of the position.
We know that running backs are becoming more committee, which is why, Christian McCaffery we think is so important because it's not a committee there whatsoever. Bijan Breece probably get that bump. I'm definitely worried about the next few guys we'll talk about here, which make me then want to lean on, to your point, Bijan or Breece amid the range of Garrett Wilson, Drake London, however everyone else has those receivers parsed. I just think it's literally a coin toss, and it's based on how you perceive the running back position. But as we're about to talk about this tier 2, 3, 4, there are a lot of concerns here. I think there are more blemishes than ever before among these guys that make most of them ignorable for receivers in that range. And if you're doing that, maybe then you do just go ahead and start your draft with one of those 2 at the top.
Let's get into tier 2 now. It runs from RB4 through RB8. The names are Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, Kyren Williams, and Travis Etienne. So, John, to me, those first 2 are kind of a step above the next 3. I do really like Taylor and I do really like Gibbs. I think it's fair to have them in tier 2 and not in tier 1. But to me, those are the very easy 2 guys at the top of tier 2. Do you see it that way, or would you put maybe another name in that range?
I'm going to have Devon Achane personally sprinkled among that group. But honestly, in your home league, you're probably waiting until the second, third round turn for Achane, and that's going to be where he's most valuable. He's basically arbitrage off of Jahmyr Gibbs. Love Jahmyr Gibbs as a player. We already talked about the Lions environment that they're going into this year, but also remember Gibbs and David Montgomery played 12 games together when the Lions returned from their bye. Before that, one or the other was always out, which allowed that other person who was healthy to have a ceiling and reach his maximum touches. But in those 12 games together, David Montgomery actually out-touched Jahmyr Gibbs by 10 total touches, including the playoffs. Montgomery's not a player who's going away despite Gibbs' talent, because Montgomery does all the dirty work that coaches love. And honestly, he was good. He wasn't great, but he was just good enough to stay on the field. So I'm a little bit worried about Gibbs. If you can get him in the middle of the second round, especially in PPR leagues, that's where you're going to see the most return on your investment. But at the end of the first round, I am admittedly a little concerned about Gibbs personally.
Fitz, anybody who has ever listened to this show knows that you were going to have Jonathan Taylor, at the top of this tier. So that's thoroughly unsurprising. Do you want to make the case for Taylor as maybe even being deserving of consideration as a tier 1 guy, or you're willing to accept him in tier 2 as long as he's at the top?
Yeah, I don't think he's that far. I think he's clearly at the top of tier 2, and you could make the case that he belongs in the back of tier 1 just because let's forget about the last couple of years where Taylor missed extensive playing time. Let's go back to 2021 when he had 1,800 plus rushing yards, over 2,000 yards from scrimmage, 20 touchdowns. And now he gets to play with Anthony Richardson, who, with the rushing threat he poses, I think it's probably going to spike Taylor's efficiency. And like the RPO stuff is just going to work splendidly with the Colts, with those two running stuff. Like I can't wait to see what it looks like because we didn't get to see Richardson and Taylor play together last year. Like it's going to be exciting, and just pray for Taylor's good health because I do think he's going to provide something close to first round value if he does stay healthy all year.
It's definitely a better bet, in my opinion, than Saquon Barkley. You don't have the age apex concerns, and Anthony Richardson's a different quarterback than Jalen Hurts in that we know Hurts has led the Eagles and carries inside the 5-yard line for 3 consecutive seasons now. Barkley's just not going to get those short equity rushing touchdowns that have kept so many running backs who have been pigeonholed off the goal line down for so long, DeAndre Swift included last year. So there are major red flags for Barkley in that ADP range this year.
Yeah, I agree. Fitz, how are you evaluating Barkley right now?
I kind of feel the same way Daigle does. Like, there's no denying that Philadelphia is going to be a better ecosystem for Barkley than the Giants were, but we have concerns about, Jalen Hurts is not a big check down guy. And as it is, Barkley hasn't really been exciting in the passing game since like 2019. And then, the short touchdowns, like even if the tush push is used less frequently, say with the retirement of Jason Kelce, the Eagles' outstanding center, like that's still Jalen Hurts territory. So maybe there is a little bit of a cap on his touchdown. Like I would not feel good about drafting Barkley in the second round. Like I'm not totally out on him. I think he could have a good season, but it's just hard to justify taking him in the second.
John, I want to ask you about Kyren Williams. He's a really difficult guy for me to try to rank this year because, like, obviously when he was on the field, like besides Christian McCaffery, was there a more fun running back to have on your roster last year when he was playing? I mean, it was a delight to have picked up Kyren Williams early or drafted him late and get what you got out of him. But at the same time, there was injury stuff. They drafted Blake Corum on day 2. There's just enough red flags to feel like, the lack of track record to feel like, well, wow, RB7, that's pretty high. But at the same time, when he was playing, that would have been a value last year. So how do you kind of parse through all that and evaluate Kyren Williams?
I still think he's at the bottom of this tier. He last year, he was the rich man's version of Rachaad White, and that they both got the same workload, but one of them was really good and the other one wasn't. We'll talk about White when we get there. But overall, yes, Blake Corum, as you mentioned, with not significant, but respectable capital on day 3. So the report right now, the most recent one is Adam Schefter saying out of camp that they want to keep Kyren Williams around 15 touches per game. Still respectable. But again, if it's based on volume, those are typically the guys we try to avoid, guys in this range who, if they're only getting there due to volume, then yes, that's concerning. Again, if I'm starting like a hero RB build because I start with 2 wide receivers in my home league, I don't mind Kyren Williams to start the 3rd round. If he's going to be reached on beyond that, probably not a player I'll have.
Fitz, the last guy in this tier is somebody who, in all the shows we've done together this offseason, I feel like we've never mentioned Travis Etienne's name. Is he becoming kind of a forgotten man? Should we be talking about him more? You are a couple spots lower than consensus on him, but what do you make of Etienne in this tier right now?
Good question. I'm not sure what to make of him because it was a Jekyll and Hyde season for him in 2023. Like he was, for the first 8 weeks of the season, averaging better than 20 PPR points per game and was like running back 2 in that category. And then after the Jaguars went on bye in week 9, come back in week 10, from that point on through the end of the season, he averaged 13.2 PPR points per game and was RB 21 in that category. So it was just like hard to understand what happened. I know I had Travis Etienne in a league last year where like wrapped up a playoff spot early and then just completely petered out at the end of the season and bowed out in my first game. And Etienne's drop off was part of that. And now we've got Doug Peterson talking about wanting to use Tank Bigsby more, which isn't exactly reassuring if you're thinking about investing in Etienne. So I'm kind of out on Travis Etienne.
John, what do you think about ETN? I mean, RB8, too high, too low, just right?
Probably too high still, given the reports that are coming out of camp, wanting, as Fitz mentioned, to reinstall Bigsby. They tried last year, but he was called tanking Bisbee for a reason. Every touch did not go the way it should have. The greatest low light reel in the NFL last year was every single Bigsby catch and carry. So right now, yes, everyone spent last year complaining about Tony Pollard when really he had the same usage as Travis Etienne. One was scoring touchdowns, though. Pollard was not. And so that's always concerning. Yeah, to me, it's just not a situation, not an ADP where I probably will have much of Etienne waiting on running backs a little longer, or again, latching on to Devon Achane, Kyron Williams type of player.